The skies above Eularis Prime burned. Crystalline towers that had stood for centuries cracked and toppled under the Kartian bombardment, shattering into glittering shards that rained across the city like glass tears. Fires raged in the ruins, their smoke curling through fractured spires, turning the once pristine skyline into a silhouette of agony beneath the surface. Deep inside, a hollowed chamber of luminous quartz, the Yulari High Council gathered for what they all knew was their final meeting. Their crystalline bodies glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing with sorrow as the bombardments shook the earth above. Each tremor sent a shiver of fractured light scattering across the chamber walls. "Every fleet has fallen," rasped Counselor Vela, her voice a strained hum. "The last of our colonies have gone silent. There are no allies left to answer." A deep, resonant silence followed her words. The Yulari were no strangers to hardship, but this was annihilation. Their people had built no weapons to rival the Kartian. Their philosophy was peace. Their mastery was in art and resonance, not war. They had always relied on the larger galactic powers for protection, but one by one, those powers had ignored their pleas, unwilling to challenge the Kartian war machine. Now, only Eularis Prime remained, and even it was crumbling. Another counselor, his crystalline form cracked with stress fractures, spoke with bitterness. "We sent messages to the Sarati, the Illyrians, even the Jari fleets. None came. To them, we are expendable." "They will regret this," whispered Vela. "When the Kartian finish us, they will move on to the others. By then, it will be too late." But despair was a heavy cloak, and it smothered every flicker of hope. Finally, the eldest among them stirred. His glow was dim, his body fissured from age and grief. Yet his voice cut through the chamber with surprising strength. "Then, let us cast our cry farther than the maps allow." The chamber rippled with unease. The star maps of the galaxy were precise, their borders well marked. Beyond Yulari space lay only shadow-uncharted, forgotten sectors. One such shadow lay on the edge of human space, a territory dismissed by most as insignificant, primitive, unworthy of interest. "No," said one counselor sharply. "That void holds no empires, no fleets, only young races, if they exist at all." And yet, the elder's voice hardened, each word ringing like a struck crystal. "When the world is ending, even a whisper in the dark is worth the breath." The chamber fell into silence. Above, another blast shook the foundations. Dust rained from the crystalline ceiling, scattering like falling stars. Slowly, Vela extended her fractured hand over the controls. The emergency beacon, rarely used, hummed to life. Its resonance pulsed out across the stars, carrying a desperate message. "To any who can hear us, we are the Yulari. Our worlds fall. Our people are dying. If there is any among the stars with the strength to aid us, please answer." The beacon's signal flared, leaping beyond the known borders, past the mapped territories, into the void, a forgotten space. For long moments, there was nothing but silence. Only the dull roar of war outside filled their ears. Some closed their eyes, already mourning. Others clenched their crystalline hands, angry at themselves for wasting precious time on hopeless fantasies. Then dashed static. A faint crackle bled into the chamber. The counselors froze. Their glowing bodies brightened with shock. Static became a murmur, then a voice deep, steady, and unmistakably alien. "Yulari distress signal received. This is Earth. Hold fast. You are not alone." The chamber erupted. In stunned silence, none spoke, none could. The voice repeated, calmer, stronger, with a confidence that seemed to press against the weight of despair itself. "This is humanity. We hear you, and we are coming." The Yulari trembled. The maps had been clear. Nothing lay beyond the borders of human space worth noting. Nothing, except this, and for the first time in days, hope flickered like a fragile flame amid the ruin. The chamber lay frozen in silence. The words echoed through every crystalline body present, reverberating deeper than sound. This is humanity. We hear you, and we are coming. For a moment, no one dared breathe. The Yulari were a species that felt sound as vibration through their bodies, and those strange syllables hummed inside them like a foreign song. A young counselor whispered, almost afraid to break the silence, "Humanity." The name was barely a footnote on any galactic chart, a fledgling race tucked away on the edge of mapped space. Their fleets were primitive, their technology clumsy, their politics irrelevant. To call them was as absurd as calling dust to stand against fire, and yet they had answered. Counselor Vela leaned forward, her light flickering with disbelief. "Confirm the signal." The technician at the console pulsed his crystalline fingers across the controls. "Confirmed," he replied, voice tight. "Origin, traceable to the Sol system, human space." Another counselor scoffed, his voice sharp with panic. "Then we are truly doomed. No fleet worth saving us lies there. They are children among stars." But Vela did not look away from the console, her glow brightening as she whispered, "Children, who answered when giants ignored us." Before any could reply, the signal hissed again, the human voice stronger now, clearer, its cadence unlike any sound the Ulari had ever known. "This is Commander Marcus Hale of the Earth Defense Accord." Ulari signal received. "We acknowledge your distress. Prepare coordinates, we will dispatch aid." Static broke the sentence apart, but the meaning struck like thunder in the chamber. Aid. The Ulari stared at one another. They had begged the Sarati, who commanded fleets of living bioships. They had pleaded with the Illyrians, who controlled wormhole gates that spanned the galaxy. They had even bent their pride before the Jari Dominion, whose armies stretched across 100 systems. None had answered, but humanity had. The elder counselor's light glowed faintly, but with a steadiness that silenced the room. "Judge them not by their years among the stars. Judge them by the courage to speak when others turned away." Outside, the bombardment roared again. The chamber shook violently, crystals cracking and shattering. Dust rained down in glowing motes as if the very planet were weeping. Yet the Ulari did not bow their heads. They clung to the words still vibrating within their forms. "Transmit planetary coordinates and enemy strength. Do not lose hope. Humanity stands with you." A counselor hissed. "They do not understand the enemy. The Karshan are butchers, merciless, endless." But Vela countered, her tone sharp as splintered glass. "And yet they came. Can you not feel it? Their voice does not tremble. They do not speak as those who pity us. They speak as those who will fight beside us." The chamber wavered in silence once more, the counselors caught between despair and the impossible spark of hope. Slowly, the technician transmitted the coordinates. Far above, the skies blazed with fire as the Carsian armada descended, black silhouettes blotting out the sun. The Ulari watched the feed with hollow dread, their cities collapsing under plasma fire, their rivers boiling into steam. Every moment felt like their last dot, and yet buried beneath the terror was the promise of a voice from the dark. Vela closed her eyes, pressing fractured hands against the console. "We have asked for allies, and though the galaxy abandoned us, perhaps we have found something better." The elder nodded, his dim light trembling. "Not allies, counselor, warriors." Outside, another blast rocked the surface, sending shards of crystal raining through the chamber. The world itself seemed moments from death. But beneath the thunder of destruction, the Ulari clung to that foreign sound in their hearts, steady, unshaken, a promise forged in steel. "This is humanity. We hear you, and we are coming." And for the first time since the war began, the Ulari dared to believe they might not fall alone. The void above Ulysses Prime churned with fire. Karshan warships hung in orbit like predatory beasts, their hulls jagged, bristling with plasma cannons that rained destruction onto the surface below. Each volley cracked the ground open, sent crystal towers collapsing, and painted the atmosphere with ash. The Yulari watched helplessly from their bunkers, waiting for the end, and then space itself tore open. At first, it was just a ripple, a distortion at the edge of the battlefield. But then the rift widened, glowing with unnatural light, and metal shapes emerged, human ships breaking into real space with engines roaring. The Yulari gasped. These vessels were nothing like the sleek, organic curves of Sarati biofleets, or the elegant lattice designs of the Illyrians. Human ships were brutal, hulking silhouettes of steel, angular and scarred, their armor plates scorched from past battles. They looked less like warships, and more like predators with teeth bared. On their hulls were names painted in bold letters: Resolute, Iron Tide, Valiant Dawn, symbols of defiance carried across the stars. For a heartbeat, silence hung across the channels. The Kartian fleet regarded the newcomers with contempt. Then, with a snarl of engines, the predators descended, confident of another easy kill. The first plasma salvo streaked toward the humans. Blazing spears of light cut across the void, direct hits. Human shields flared, cracked, and bled fire. Smoke trailed from hulls. Any other fleet would have fallen back, but the humans advanced. "Form the line," a human commander's voice barked across the open channel, raw and steady. "Hold the bastards here." Their ships locked into formation, guns blazing. Rail cannons spat streaks of tungsten that tore into Kartian armor. Missile salvos erupted, dozens at once, weaving through enemy fire to detonate in blinding flashes. Where the Kartian fought like predators toying with prey, humanity fought like cornered wolves, furious, unyielding, relentless. The counselors stared at the battlefield, their crystalline forms glowing with shock. "They don't retreat," one whispered in disbelief. "No," Vela answered softly, watching as the Resolute absorbed another barrage, her hull scarred, but still firing. "They refuse." The battle was chaos incarnate. The Iron Tide rammed an enemy corvette head-on, tearing it in half before spinning, guns blazing. The Valiant Dawn unleashed a broadside so fierce it split a destroyer in two, debris scattering like burning meteors. Each human ship fought as if it carried the weight of an entire species on its back. But the cost was terrible. Human hulls cracked. Fires burned within. Some ships drifted, gutted, yet their guns still fired until the last breath of power was gone. The comms filled with human voices, calm, resolute, determined. Not a single one begged for rescue. Not a single one screamed in fear. They fought to the end, not for glory, but because someone had asked for help. The Kartian faltered. Their fleet, accustomed to cowed prey, found itself bleeding under the jaws of wolves that would not die quietly. A flagship bellowed orders to regroup, but the line had already broken. The humans had driven a wedge straight through their formation. On the ground, as plasma fire slowed, the Yulari watched in awe. For the first time in weeks, the sky above was not only fire and ruin, it was resistance. The elder counselor's dim light brightened faintly as he whispered, "They are not children, they are something else entirely." Above, the human fleet burned, but it held the line. The Resolute broadcast across all frequencies, its voice battered but unshaken. "Yulari's Prime, this is Earth. You are not alone. Stand with us and we will fight." The Yulari trembled. Against all reason, against all odds, a new truth crystallized in their hearts. Salvation had arrived not in shining fleets, but in steel, scarred by battle, and men who refused to bow. The battlefield was silent, not the silence of peace, but of ruin, the kind that came after fire had burned everything it touched. Above Yularis's Prime, the void was littered with wreckage. Shattered hulls drifted like corpses, their twisted metal glowing faintly from still burning fires. Human ships floated among them, scarred and battered, their armor torn open like wounds. Some no longer moved at all, and yet they had held. The Carson fleet was gone, scattered into retreat. The wolves had bled, but the predators had been driven off. In the council chamber, the Yulari stared at the battlefield feed in silence. Their crystalline bodies glowed faintly, not with sorrow, but with awe. The impossible had happened. Humanity had come, and humanity had endured, but at what cost? The answer came when human shuttles descended to the surface. Their hulls were scorched, their engines groaning, but they landed with steady defiance. Outpoured soldiers in armor streaked with ash, some limping, some bloodied, yet all carrying themselves with the same unshakable resolve as their ships. The Yulari had expected warriors drunk on victory. Instead, they found men and women with eyes hollow from loss, still standing despite the weight of grief pressing down on their shoulders. "Counselor." Vela approached cautiously as the first human officer removed his helmet. His face was smeared with soot, his jaw clenched tight against exhaustion. A gash ran across his cheek, but his eyes' sharp burning never wavered. You bled for us," Vela whispered, her crystalline voice trembling. The officer's gaze swept across the ruined plaza, taking in the Yulari survivors huddled in the shadows of fallen towers. He gave a faint, tired smile. "That's what allies do." The words struck harder than any weapon. Allies. The galaxy's great powers had abandoned them. Yet here stood humans, broken and bloodied, still speaking of loyalty as though it were sacred. Another shuttle door groaned open. Medics spilled out, rushing not to human wounded but to Yulari civilians. They patched fractured crystalline forms with improvised tools, their hands steady, even as their own comrades collapsed beside them. One medic tore a strip from her uniform to bind a Yulari's glowing fracture. Ignoring the blood pouring from her own side, the Yulari counselors stood in stunned silence. For centuries they had believed the galaxy's strength lay in its mighty fleets and empires. But here were humans, a species barely noticed on the charts, bleeding freely for strangers, without hesitation. Far above, the Resolute hung broken in orbit, her hull venting atmosphere. Reports came in, entire decks gone, dozens lost, yet the captain refused to abandon orbit until every survivor on the ground was secured. The elder counselor bowed his head, his dim light flickering. "They bleed as though our fate were their own," he murmured, "even as their own lives burn away." Vela's glow pulsed brighter, fierce with realization. "No," she whispered, "not as though too mid is." The Kartian had learned to expect prey. They had learned to break spirits with fire. But they had not yet learned what it meant to fight those who would rather bleed together than kneel apart. As night fell across the shattered city, the humans set up crude defenses, weapons bristling against the horizon. Their voices carried, through the dark gruff laughter, quiet encouragement, promises that the fight was far from over. The Yulari listened, their crystal hearts resonating with something they had almost forgotten: hope. The council chamber still bore scars of the bombardment. Cracks spiderwebbed across its crystalline walls, shards littered the floor, and every tremor of distant explosions sent faint ripples through the fractured structure. The Yulari counselors sat in uneasy silence, their light dim. As the humans entered for the first time, boots echoed against the crystal floor, heavy, jarring, alive with intent. The humans carried the battlefield with them, armor dented, uniforms scorched, their faces marked by blood and smoke. Yet their eyes burned with the fire of predators who refused to be caged. At their lead strode Commander Marcus Hale, the same voice who had answered the Yulari's desperate signal. His presence filled the chamber, his expression carved from stone. Without hesitation, he dropped a battered datapad onto the center of the crystal table, its surface flickering with projected maps. "Enemy fleet strength," Hale said, his voice sharp, clipped. "Movement patterns, supply lines, vulnerabilities." The Yulari stared. No other Alino empire had ever spoken to them this way. They had begged for rescue, for mercy. But these humans, they spoke of war. Counselor Vela leaned forward, her glow flickering with both awe and unease. You mean to continue fighting, after the losses you've already suffered? Hale's gaze snapped to her, unflinching. Losses mean nothing if the fight isn't finished. He tapped the map, where red markers denoted Kartian fleets. They think you're weak. They think you'll break. That's exactly why. We hit them where they don't expect it. A murmur of unease rippled through the Yulari. They were builders, artists, diplomats. They had never spoken of war in such raw, savage terms. One counselor protested, his crystalline form trembling. We cannot match the Kartian in strength. Every fleet we've sent has been obliterated. Hale's expression hardened. That's because you've been fighting on their terms. He stabbed a finger at the map. Straight battles, open skies, honor. That's not war, it's suicide. The chamber fell silent at the bluntness of his words. Another human officer stepped forward, dropping a handful of jagged shards of metal onto the table pieces torn from Kartian holes. His voice was gravel, his eyes dark. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. Images flickered across the holomap, asteroid fields becoming ambush sites, supply lines sabotaged, enemy patrols drawn into traps. Every plan was ruthless, unorthodox, dripping with the kind of cunning the Yulari had never dared imagine. Counselor Vela's glow pulsed brighter as realization sank in. This is not mercy, she whispered. This is vengeance. On our behalf. Hale gave no denial. His voice was low, almost a growl. Your enemy slaughtered your people, burned your worlds. If they want to treat this war as a hunt, then fine. Let's show them what happens when the prey fights back. The elder counselor's dim light flickered with conflict. For generations, the Yulari had clung to ideals of peace. But now those ideals lay buried beneath rubble, their people scattered, their futures shattered. He looked at the humans, standing bloodied but unbroken, and saw no cruelty in their eyes, only resolve. And for the first time, he felt something new. Not shame, not fear, but the stirring of defiance. Above the chamber, the skies rumbled with distant thunder, the enemy regrouping, ready to strike again. The Yulari counselors turned their gaze toward the maps glowing before them. For the first time in the war, they saw more than just despair. They saw a path forward. You called for allies. What you got were wolves. If you're willing to fight, then we'll fight with you. But understand this. Mercy doesn't win wars. Fire does. The chamber pulsed with silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the Yulari counselors brightened their glow in agreement. The hunt was not over, and now, they would fight it on human terms. The stars became a hunting ground, where once the Kartian had stalked, unchallenged across Yulari space. Their fleets now moved with hesitation. Convoys that had once thundered proudly between systems began to vanish. Patrol ships drifted into asteroid belts and never returned. Supply depots erupted in fire without warning. It was as if shadows had come alive, and those shadows carried the mark of humanity. The first strike came in the Karthus expanse, a dense asteroid field the Kartian used as a shortcut. There, cruisers entered confident, shields humming with power. But hidden among the rocks, human ships lay waiting. The Iron Tide, scarred from its last battle, crept forward in silence. Mines floated free, invisible until the cruisers triggered them. Explosions ripped across the formation, tearing hulls open in fire. Railguns barked from the dark, missiles streaked like hunting spears. By the time the survivors stumbled out of the expanse, half their fleet was gone. The Kartian command issued furious orders. Regroup, reinforce, hunt the humans down. But humanity had no intention of fighting on open ground. Every ambush was different. In one system, Yulari engine by human officers collapsed a moon's crust onto a refueling base, burying it in molten stone. In another, Human Marines boarded an enemy carrier under cover of debris, leaving it a burning husk that drifted silently until its reactor went critical. The Kartian roared with frustration. They had come expecting slaughter, swift and easy. Instead, they found themselves bleeding slowly, death by 1,000 cuts. The galaxy began to whisper. From distant systems, rumors spread of the humans. They were not polished warriors like the Sarati, nor masters of technology like the Illyrians. They were something older, something raw, a race that fought with the fury of those who refused to bow, who turned weakness into teeth. The Ulari counselors watched these victories unfold with disbelief. For the first time in memory, they saw their enemy hesitate. And with every ambush, every burning wreck, their own people grew bolder. Survivors volunteered to aid human crews. Miners repurposed their tools into weapons. Farmers carried rifles alongside soldiers in the ruins of a crystal city. Counselor Vela walked among the people, her glow steady for the first time since the war began. "Look to the skies," she told them. "The humans bleed, but they bleed. Beside us, the Kartian feared them. And if we stand with them, they will fear us too." Above, another battle raged. The Resolute, patched and scarred, tore through a Karsian destroyer with a point-blank salvo. Human voices echoed across comms, not desperate, not pleading but fierce, unyielding. "Target down, move to the next, keep the pressure on." The wolves were hunting, and the predators were beginning to understand what it meant to be prey. On the Kartian flagship, commanders snarled in disbelief. Their prey had turned into something they could not predict. They sneered at the humans' crude ships, yet those very ships kept leaving their fleets in ruin. One commander spat a curse. "They fight like demons. No honor, no restraint." But fear had already seeped into their ranks. Every jump into hyperspace carried the same question. Will the humans be waiting in the dark? Back on Ulysses Prime, the elder counselor bowed his cracked form before the human officers. His voice trembled, not with despair, but with reverence. "You have turned our weakness into a weapon. You have made us hunters again." Commander Hale only shook his head. "We didn't make you hunters. You always were. You just needed to be reminded." The chamber pulsed with new light. The war was no longer about survival. It was about defiance, and humanity had lit the fire. The prison ship hung in orbit, blackened from battle, its hull scarred by railgun fire. Inside its shattered hold, the air thrummed with tension. The Kartian commander was dragged forward, his jagged armor dented, his once proud stride broken by chains. His eyes burning coals of hatred swept across the chamber, pausing on the humans who stood like statues of iron. He sneered. "You fight like monsters." His voice echoed, sharp and venomous. "Even predators show mercy when prey is broken, but you strike from shadows. You kill without honor. You bleed yourselves for strangers. You are not warriors, you are butchers." The Ulari counselors, watching from the gallery, shifted uneasily. For the first time, they looked at their human allies not with awe but with the faint tremor of fear. Was it true? Were these wolves they had unleashed more dangerous than the predators they fought? Commander Hale stood silent for a long moment, his scarred face impassive. Then he stepped forward, his boots ringing against the steel floor. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Too quiet. You think mercy is weakness," he said. "You think honor means giving you the chance to slaughter us again?" The Kartian spat blood. "You fight without rules, without restraint. You terrify even those you claim to save." Hale's eyes narrowed. "Good." The single word hung in the chamber like a blade. The Ulari counselors gasped, their crystalline bodies flickering with shock. But Hale didn't flinch. He leaned closer to the chained commander, his voice like steel drawn across stone. "You call us monsters because we fight in ways you cannot control. You call us butchers because we don't play by your rules. But understand this, His voice dropped, deadly soft. "We didn't come here to be what you wanted. We came because someone asked for help, and when humanity is asked," he straightened, his voice rising like thunder, "we answer." The chamber shook with the force of his words. The Kartian commander snarled. But for the first time, his eyes flickered with something that wasn't hatred. It was fear. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the sound of chains clinking as the prisoner was dragged away. For a long time, the Yulari counselors remained still. Finally, Vela spoke, her glow faint and unsteady. "You frighten even us," she admitted softly. "We called for allies. But what if what we brought are not allies at all, but something far more dangerous?" Hale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't call for monsters, you called for warriors. But war makes monsters of us all. The difference is we choose who we unleash it on." The elder counselor bowed his cracked form, his glow flickering. "Then may your fury remain for our enemies alone." Above them, news spread like wildfire across the stars. The galaxy whispered of Earth not with dismissal, but with dread. Stories spread of ambushes that left fleets in ruin, of humans who fought long after their ships were broken, of soldiers who bled for strangers and refused to surrender. The whispers carried a single refrain: the humans have come, and they do not fight like anyone else. On the surface of Ularus Prime, children looked to the scarred skies and spoke of humans not as saviors, but as legends beings who turned fear itself into a weapon. But in quiet corners, some Yulari still whispered the question no one dared ask aloud. When the war was done, would humanity's wrath fade, or would it remain, hungry, searching for another fight? The final battle came not in silence, but in fire. Above the shattered world of Varus, the Kartian gathered their Mitan armada, stretching across the void like a steel horizon. Dozens of carriers, legions of destroyers, fleets that had crushed empires before. It was to be the strike that would end all resistance. But humanity had been waiting, hidden among fractured moons, beneath fields of drifting debris, and cloaked in the wreckage of old battles. The wolves prepared. Yulari voices whispered prayers across channels, their crystalline songs trembling with both fear and hope. And then the humans struck. The first salvo came from nowhere, tearing into the enemy's vanguard. Minds ignited in chain reactions. Asteroids came alive with concealed railguns, and entire destroyers vanished in blossoms of white fire. The void erupted in chaos. The Kartian roared in rage, their fleets turning to meet the ambush. But the humans never stood still. Every moment, every breath, they shifted, striking, vanishing, striking again. Where the Kartian had expected prey, they found predators dancing in the dark. On the bridge of the Resolute, alarms blared, the ship trembling under enemy fire. Commander Hale gripped the railing, eyes locked on the tactical display. "Push them in, herd them, don't let them scatter." The Yulari ships, fragile, untrained and warm, moved alongside the humans, their formations guided by fierce human officers. For the first time, they fought not as prey, but as hunters. And the Kartian felt it. In desperation, the enemy unleashed their flagship, a behemoth bristling with weapons, its hull glowing with shield fire. It advanced like a titan, cannons spitting destruction, crushing human frigates in its path. But Hale only narrowed his eyes. "Bring it down." The order carried across the fleet. Every human ship, every Yulari vessel, every battered survivor, turned their weapons on the giant. Missiles screamed, railguns cracked, energy beams lanced across the void. Still, the beast endured, until the iron tide, its engines burning out, its hull breaking apart, rammed itself into the flagship's heart. The explosion split the void with light brighter than a star. When the glare faded, the Titan was gone. Silence fell across the comms. Then, slowly, one by one, voices rose, not in despair but in victory. The Kartian broke. Their fleets scattered, their proud commanders silenced. For the first time in living memory, the hunters fled. On Ularis Prime, the council gathered to watch the aftermath. Survivors wept in the streets, their crystalline bodies glowing bright once more. Children sang of the humans, not as monsters, but as saviors. Yet in the council chamber, there was unease. Counselor Vela, her glow steady but somber, turned to Commander Hale. "The Karshan feared you," she said softly. "And now, so does the galaxy. They will never forget what they saw here." Hale's gaze drifted to the stars, to the wreckage burning silently in the void. His voice was quiet, almost weary. "Good. Let them remember. Not for our sake, for yours. So no one dares come for you again." The elder counselor bowed his fractured form. "And when they do, will humanity answer again?" Hale's eyes hardened. "If you call, we'll come. But pray you never need to." The chamber fell silent. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. But in their light, a new truth spread across the galaxy. The humans had come. They had fought. They had bled. And they had shown every empire that sometimes salvation does not come robed in mercy, but cloaked in fire.